want some of you to just repeat what you remember, whatever.
So we began with a basic understanding of what we were taught in the first semester about how the courses, how the not courses, but the paper is for learning how to learn to do something rather than just learning a text, perhaps. And then we unpacked the terms, we started unpacking the term, and the first of such terms was Indian, and how contestable claims were put in, and how people suggested what Indian could mean, or different perceptions regarding that, while it is something that you cannot truly justify with a single line or word, because across aeons, across different epochs, it has kept on evolving and changing, be it the geographical boundaries or the political.
So we discussed that idea of India is India as we understand it today in terms of a political unit with fixed, more or less fixed geographical boundaries. And these geographical boundaries are also very often contested. Even in present, means China believes that some part of Indian map belongs to them, and India believes that that's not true, right? And Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and China occupied India, and all that. So you will see that even borders are contested, right? So nation as a political unit, right, having the idea of citizenship and identity, that you are an Indian, right? This kind of notion of India is fairly modern. If you look back, I mean, even if you have studied a little bit of history, you will remember that in 1947, when India got independence, people like Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel had to reconcile hundreds of princely states, right? So the polity in India was made up of multiplicity of kingdoms and multiplicity of political units rather than a single political unit that we have now. It was forged by powerful politics and negotiations of people like Sardar Patel, right? So he built India literally into a single political unit. Now, this single political unit did not exist even before the British came, and in fact, that was the reason why Britishers could succeed in capturing the whole subcontinent, because one political entity was hardly interested in supporting the other, right, when the Britishers were busy capturing them. So Indian idea of India as a single political unit is a modern one, right? But if you look at cultural and civilizational and ethnic kind of space that subcontinent depicts, then it's fairly ancient, right? It goes back to more than 2,500 years from today. It goes back to that. After the decline of the Indus Valley or Harappan civilization, you get a kind of understanding of cultural space that has also changed. For example, the Rig Veda would talk about a different kind of geography, and the later Vedas, the Atharva, Sam Veda, and the Yajur Veda, and the Upanishads and Aranyaks, which forms today what is known as the Vedic corpus, right? The Vedic corpus. It consists of three or four samhitas, right? Three, what some people thought it was, but also four. Four basic samhitas means the texts. So the four Vedic texts are the Rig Veda, which is one of the most oldest texts on the subcontinent. Maybe oldest text in the world, we don't know. But large part of it was orally preserved and memory. So the people who spoke that language called ancient Sanskrit or the Vedic Sanskrit had to devise systems of memorizing those texts, right? And how to sing them. So meter and chand, as well as singing or psalm, was important part of the preservation of that knowledge. In fact, the word Ved means knowledge, Vid, right? So we find a kind of history going back which is fairly ancient, but modern understanding of nation that we have today is fairly recent, right? And the problem arises when we start projecting what is uh, 19th century or 20th century onto something that is 17th century or first century after Christ. So this is one of the pitfalls that we have to be aware of. Yeah, that we can't project जो आज है वो जो हजारों साल पहले था उसके पर. We can't keep on projecting it, right? Or we can't look at it from today's understanding, modern understanding of quality. I hope I am making myself clear. So we have to make distinction between India as a political entity unit and India as a civilizational cultural space, right? And that would include what is known as South Asia today. So South Asia is a larger terminology that many scholars prefer over India, because in those days it would also include lot of part of, say, Java or Sumatra where Sanskrit was spoken. And I think some of kings like Chols or Pallav, they conquered some part of Java and Sumatra, right? Indonesia, and so on and so forth. So the point that I'm making is that we have to be aware of this history of Indian civilization and Indian politics. We can't project it backwards, right? And interestingly, many scholars have argued that the idea of political nationhood is deeply connected to the idea of modernity. And it's seen as a kind of Western phenomena. Nations started emerging in 19th century Europe, right? And even before that, in Britain and France, you had nation states emerging out of the monarchies, right? So if you look at the Western history of the idea of nation, or what we mean by nation, then it's only in the 19th century that nationalism and nation becomes a very powerful entity. So people started thinking of themselves as having a national identity on those lines, and the idea of nation state began to emerge, where people would put a person in power, right, or a party in power. So idea of democratic nation is deeply Western idea. And when India adopted this, people argued that it's a derivative kind of, it's a mimicry that you're doing. But then many scholars would point out that how Indian idea of nation and how India developed the idea of nation was very different from the Western one, right? And one of the important differences in Indian understanding or idea of India as a nation state is that you cannot reduce that nation state to a particular language or ethnicity. For example, English nation would mean English speaking nation, right? Or French would mean France would be a nation of French, people who spoke French language. German would be the nation of Germans who would speak German language. So ethnicity, language, and nation state were in the West a kind of correlated. But in India, you cannot think on those lines. You cannot say that particular ethnicity in India represents nation just because it's in majority. I hope I'm making myself clear. So multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilingual nation was one of the important understandings of nation that developed in India, right? So India did not have a single language. India does not have a single language, which is national language of India. We have official languages. We are the Constitution of India prescribes three language formula, where first language is official language of state is Hindi, English, and the third is the language of particular region or state. So three language formula is what is constitutionally decided in India. and India has got hundreds of languages, right? So the point is that Western understanding of nation is monolingual, monoethnic very often, right? So Russian would be Russian nation, Russian language. China, for example, right? Then India cannot be thought on these lines almost. Japanese culture, Japanese nation is represented by Japanese ethnicity and Japanese language. But India cannot be represented by single uh, ethnicity or language, right? So this is a very different kind of understanding of India that we have. And second thing that the scholars point out, historians point out, is yeah, I will come to you, Stuti. Just let me finish what I have to say. And I think this is a good practice, Stuti. We should raise our hands. Anybody who has to say something can raise your hands, so that so that only one person should not get chance to speak, right? So please, if you have to say anything, raise your hand. If you have a question to ask, raise your hand, right? That is a better, or put something in chat box. Either of the things will do for me. So the point I'm making, that the second difference between the Western idea of nation and Indian idea of nation is that Indian idea of nation was formulated in anti-colonial struggle. That it was, nationhood was one of the political formations against imperial and colonial dominance, right? Something which sets it off from, say, Germany or Italy or Britain or France or even China or Japan. So Indian nation was forged in an anti-colonial position. So anti-colonial nationalism was one of the important dimensions of Indian nation, right? So the idea of India in is different from the idea of Japan in Japan or idea of France in France. Do I make myself clear? Right. So the point that I am making, larger point, is that you should avoid projecting this modern idea of nation onto something that is ancient or something that is historically uh, well past that. Right. Yeah. Anyone has to say something regarding this?
So,
Yeah.
so what you just said about India being diverse and not, we can't reduce it to one language, one ethnicity. Is this
Yeah.
something more unique to just our country or perhaps the South Asian region, or is this, can we see this in some other region of the world also? Like I was trying to think on those lines, but I couldn't come up with any other country. Maybe Sri Lanka, perhaps.
Yeah, and China also has, see, all nations would have some sort of diversity, right? But the kind of diversity we experience
Can you
is
repeat
phenomenal.
yourself? Your voice is
Right?
breaking.
My voice is breaking. Okay. Okay, can you hear me now? Is
Yeah,
it better?
yeah.
Yeah. So the kind of diversity we experience is phenomenal. Means just look at the people in class. आपके class के ही लोग देखो. Just look at your classroom, man. How many people are from places who belong to places which are not in Gujarat or Baroda? Just raise your hand. Who are not originally from Baroda, just raise your hand. Bhavya, Rukmini, or Gujarat, say for example. How many people are from not from Gujarat? Yeah. So Aaron, where are you from?
Sir, I'm originally from Kerala.
Kerala. See, and then you have Richa. Where are you from, Richa?
Punjab.
पंजाब. अब दो कहाँ केरला और कहाँ पंजाब, इन दोनों के बीच में पूरा यूरोप आ जाता है, राइट? आयुषी, वेयर आर यू फ्रॉम?
I'm from Gujarat itself.
गुजरात. ओके. मैं Maitri. Where are you from?
I'm from Maharashtra.
Maharashtra. Rukmini,
Uttar Pradesh.
Uttar Pradesh. See, so in your classroom you will find such a kind of diversity. It's almost like we call it subcontinent, but it's a continent, right? And Bernard Shaw must be from Ireland.
Sir, I am from Manipur, sir.
मणिपुर कैसे चला गया बर्नार्ड शॉ?
Pardon me, sir.
हाँ? बर्नार्ड शॉ मणिपुर कैसे चला गया ऐसे मुझे? How have you reached? You belong to Ireland, don't you? So Kerala, Uttar Pradesh, Manipur, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Kerala, Punjab. Look at the diversity. And each of these states have their distinctive languages, traditions, religious, caste equations. For example, Punjab and Kerala would find hardly anything which is similar, either demographically or linguistically or geographically, or whatever way you can think of, right? So this kind of diversity is what India represents. Just imagine how, in order to think of India, imagine India, right? You have to take on board these diversities, phenomenal diversities. And this much diversity, ethnically, religiously, culturally, linguistically, is not found in any other country, even except for certain East European states. Yeah, Bhavya, कुछ कहना था?
Yes,
Where are
sir.
you from, Bhavya?
Sir, I'm from Uttarakhand, Dehradun.
Right. So,
So I wanted to say something else about
yeah.
this very question. Sir, I think India comes first, and second number, I would say United States of America could be taken, because from Italians to Irish to South Americans to Mexican, Venezuelans, with a lot of different kinds of people are there.
I think you are
But
mixing up
their
two
culture
continents.
is not.
Bhavya, you are mixing up two continents. America as North America and South America are different political entities. So North America and Mexico and Argentina or Chile, this is South Latin America. जिसे कहते हैं, it's not a part of United States of America. Don't
No,
mix
sir,
that
I'm
up.
saying like no, sir, I'm saying like many of the people from these Latin American countries are also part of the United States citizens, and the kind of
No,
people are there.
Excuse me, sir. I would
It's
like
not
to
the
clear.
same.
They are immigrants. They are not natives.
They are migrants. Migrants, and you have to be a citizen of America by migrating and getting official citizenship, and that's the political impact problem in America, right?
But then
Starting from
North Indians are also.
Pardon?
But North Indians are also sort of immigrants if you look at it that way. We've just been here for a lot longer than the uh, Mexicans in United States. Alright, there is some difference as far as the time amount of the people that have spent there. But when I see diversity, America is one of those countries that has a good amount of diversity in it.
No. In fact, it doesn't value diversity. In fact,
You're missing
everybody.
the point entirely.
Say for example, if person from Kerala wants to talk to a person from Punjab, right? And if you don't have English education, because that is only 10-20% of the population has English education. So how will you communicate? कोई मुझे पता है. A person from Tamil Nadu, how will that person communicate with a person in Manipur? But in America, you'd never have such linguistic problems. Never ever. And it prides itself in what is known as melting pot. So whatever migration happens, it says that you have to be American. But in India, you don't cease to be Punjabi or Manipuri or Keralite or Tamil or Marathi, right? You have your own diverse traditions, cultures, languages that you still use. So diversity in India is far, far more complex. Number of languages सिर्फ देख लो इंडिया में और अमेरिका में. That should be sufficient.
America is more of a cesspool then, rather than.
But it does not have that diversity of languages.
Yes.
Fairly monolingual space, right? So you cannot, and it has a deep European heritage, which is a kind of homogenizing effect. So a German person comes to America and then becomes American and speaks American English, right? So American Constitution does not follow multilingual formulas. Three language formula India may use. So the point that I'm making is that how India is understood today, right, is an Indian way of understanding, and it's not a derivative of Western one purely. The Western model of nation is not simply replicated in India. So that is important thing, and this was what I was saying in the context of not projecting it backwards. Yeah, so Richa and Maitri has to say something. So Richa. Or Maitri. Yeah, whoever. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Richa. Okay. So if it is by mistake that you have raised your hand. Anyway, so that was the larger point when we started unpacking the idea of India, right? And we also discussed how there are various ways of understanding India. There cannot be a single way. Somebody says that it's a kind of spiritual experience that you just know that you are Indian, right? Because of certain spiritual development. So those kind of persons are rare because मेरे में तो ऐसा कोई है ही नहीं trait spiritually कि मैं Indian हूँ जानने का क्या करें. I'm spiritually underdeveloped. Anyway, then somebody said, but that is also a valid way of looking at India, right? And then somebody said that you cannot have a single norm. Then you cannot have some people say that there is certain set of values and cultures. Then somebody said there is shared history. And all these points put together, right, is our complex understanding of nation. Yeah, Rukmini is saying that in Irish and German, and German in respective countries, but Marathi, UP, Rajasthani only in India. He is not having a separate country. Yeah, that's true. India is a nation made of many nations, and we have to accept that. इसलिए अब इलेक्शन जीतने का भी अब तुक्का जो गुजरात में चल सकता है पंजाब में नहीं चल सकेगा. पंजाब में चलता है वो यूपी में नहीं चलेगा. यूपी में चलता है केरला में नहीं चलेगा. Right, so we have to keep in mind it's a multi-national nation almost. Right, we have multiple nationhoods that are in it, and very often these nations have their own pride and their own identity. That you take pride in being Rajasthani or Punjabi or being Manipuri or being Malayalam or being Hindi or UP or Marathi or whatever. Right. So that was our discussion on India. So you got the point that I'm making. I made 2 points, not to project the modern understanding onto the past. And secondly, our understanding of India is a nation is different from the Western one. So these are the 2 points that I made at some length. And that brings us to the other term. Anything that you have to say about the first term? दिव्या या रिचा कुछ कहना है? Okay, if you don't have a question, please lower your hands because that keeps on confusing me as if you wanted to say something. Okay. So the second point in the second term in your paper, Indian writing. And what do you understand by writing?
Just writing or Indian writing?
इंडियन राइटिंग तो इंडियन डिस्कस कर लिया, अब तो सिर्फ लिटरेचर और
हाँ.
राइटिंग को डिस्कस करते हैं, राइट?
Okay.
And then we'll put all these things together. We are opening all the packets and then we'll pour them in together at end. So what do you understand by literature or writing?
For literature, we had, I think, a discussion in class where we talked about oral literature and written literature, quote unquote written literature, and and you said that literature, oral. You said that it's literature is basically writing. You can't really rely on oral literature. That is not literature. So writing, the art of recording the oral, whatever is orally spoken, is what would constitute the term literature. So writing is an important part of literature as a whole.
Right. Exactly. And we discussed it in first semester, right?
Yeah.
And we had a term called literature in glossary of literary terms, where M.H. Abrams talks about literature in a broad sense of the term to include anything that is written, right? It may be a brochure or a newspaper article, or it may be WhatsApp text, or it may be anything that is written, your answer sheets. That's the broad descriptive sense of literature. Literature comes from the word literatura, which means to write, right? And that's why Indian literature or Indian writing ऐसे हम use करते हैं, because we are using the Western idea of literature. But then the problem that started arising is that that has also changed in Europe. Means it was in France, probably somewhere in the 17th or 18th century, that the art of writing or writing elegantly, or what is known as la belle letters, right? The belle letters are elegant writings, writing for the sake of aesthetics rather than for pragmatic or utilitarian purpose. That kind of notion started developing, and literature evolved as a category of writing which had an aesthetic significance, right? So it's the narrow sense of the term literature, which include various genres like poetry and fiction and short story and plays and epics and novels and all those genres, right? So this history of the term literature is a very Western one, right? And now the problem starts when we try to impose it or understand history of literature in India or Indian. By India, now I don't mean nation state, but India as a cultural civilizational complex, a diverse complex, right? So when we start using that for cultural history here, non-Western space, then it runs into all sorts of problems. Right. One problem is that we did not have word for elegant writing. Likhna had a different place in Indian society, right? Writing, if you go back to 2,500 years, it was writing is believed to have invented in Egypt, right? In Bronze Age civilization. You also find it in Sumerian and Mesopotamian cultures. You also find it in Harappan civilization. They used writing, and nobody has decoded the script yet. So it had a script, which was a pictographic, ideographic kind of script, which people have broken their heads over, but we don't know what it is. So whether to call that literature is something that is, what should I say? We can't call it literature because nobody understands wo kya hai, right? So script emerges fairly late, around 3rd century BC, almost 3 or 4 centuries after the decline of Harappan civilization before Christ, right? And the oral texts that were the most important texts that the speakers of Indo-Aryan language, right, who came from Central Asia, people called Britishers called them Aryans, right, and later on they also invented something called Aryan invasion theory, which is disproved, right? In Aryans, they were not Aryans and they did not invade. They are more of nomadic tribes from Central Asia who have access to horse. Horse becomes central to their life. Like they are semi-pastoral people who have come into northern India when the Harappan civilization is declining due to environmental and all those problems. These people from Central Asia who come into the subcontinent, they have their texts, right? The religious and spiritual knowledge. Knowledge के लिए उनके language में word है vid or vidya या ved, right? So ved or knowledge. So and it was preserved in the forms of samhitas, as I said, texts. So these texts are committed to memory. These are not written or printed text, right? Because the Indo-Aryans did not know how to write. पहला राइटिंग का इंस्टेंस इंडिया में मिलता है वो है अशोक के इंस्क्रिप्शंस and that is almost 3rd century before Christ or somewhere down the line, and it uses a script called Brahmi, and that Brahmi script was later used by many languages in India. Brahmi becomes a kind of mother script, a matrix script जिसमें से पंजाबी भी आती है और गुजराती भी आती है और बेसिकली देवनागरी आती है जिसमें से गुजराती, मराठी, हिंदी ऐसी लिपियां बनती है, राइट? सो राइटिंग इन इंडिया इज फेयरली डिफरेंट हिस्ट्री एंड huge amount of literary compositions that happened outside the courts of the kings is in the form of oral songs that are transmitted by the groups through memory, right? So then, is that not literature? Is a question. So the traditions of telling stories of Ram, for example, exist in all Indian languages. Ramayana is not a text, but a tradition of storytelling, right? A storytelling tradition that has existed in multiplicity of language. You find even in Japan and Indonesia, the Ramayana storytelling traditions, right? Ceylon, whatnot. So you have to get that literary text, if it means written text, then huge amount of texts in India were largely orally transmitted. So what should we do with them? They don't fall into the Western notion of literatura. You get what I'm saying? और belle letter भी नहीं है और literatura भी नहीं है. तो उनके लिए what you can do is look at Indian categories. So the first category that was used in India to describe aesthetic writing or aesthetic composition, verbal composition, was kavya, right? Mantra and sukta is what you find in the Veda and Upanishad, and that is miraculous chants. These have a spiritual power and to please the god and get what you want. So if you chant those at right time and the right person does it for you, you get that phal. So mantra is those powerful verbal chants. Now that is not kavya because it has a religious, spiritual, ritualistic practice. Kavya emerges in the courts of the kings, and those kavya would be both performed as well as heard, drushya as well as shravya. So kavya is something like poesis in Greek, right? Something that is made. So it's a verbal construct, a discursive construct, which does not have any religious or spiritual purpose primarily, but aesthetic purpose is the primary purpose of those texts. So that tradition begins in the courts of kings, right? So kavya, you also have term like sahitya. Sahitya is a definition of kavya, right? And shabdartho sahito kavya. So shabda and artha coming together would form literature. So literature की जो category western category है और साहित्य और काव्य cannot be equated actually. And that is another problem. Just like the idea of nation is not very compatible with kingdoms, multiplicity of kingdoms and dynasties, right? In similar way, literature as a Western modern category cannot be used to understand literary phenomena on the subcontinent. Yes, Tuti, up पूछो प्रश्न.
Sir, like oral, like there is um, controversy, perhaps not controversy, but like we have conflicts over whether oral tradition is considered literature. What about so oral? This is more on the ancient side, historical side. But in modern times, we also have this new form of literature. Literature maybe what would it be? What it would fall under is what I want to discuss. Spoken word poetry and storytelling. Spoken word, basically. So how
Yes,
would we?
spoken word is definitely considered performance poetry or spoken word poetry is considered form of literature. उसमें कोई controversy क्या है?
Because no, not controversial. That was a poor choice of words. But I think the writing part has a lot to do with the fact that the oral literature has been recorded and so it has been preserved. So in the same way, the spoken word in today's digital world is recorded. So if we are able to record these even the oral traditions of olden times, would they uh, fall into literature cleanly?
First, this is a very interesting question. By cleanly, what do you mean?
Because right now we are sure that whatever is written down is pretty much literature, right? But the oral tradition, the stories of olden times, उनके इतने सारे versions है because it has been passed down over centuries. Now, if we are able to put together one version of it somehow, or even various versions of it and record them and preserve them, so would this dilemma maybe be solved relating to
Okay, so it's a very interesting question. Let me unpack that dilemma for you, right?
yeah.
Let me open it up because you are conflating multiple things here. So first thing that you are conflating or mixing up is a canonical idea of literature versus popular literature, right? So very often the canonical idea of literature that has come to us is deeply colonial one, right? It has come through colonial education system in India and our education system. The किताब में जो होता है ना वही literature है लिखा हुआ. That's the West. Our understanding of literature itself is deeply colonized. That's the first problem. So when you say whether that can fit, whether spoken word poetry as well as the oral traditions which are recorded on a digital media like spoken word, both can fit cleanly into it, is asking whether these two forms, cultural forms, can be put within canonical understanding of literature. That is the first thing that you're asking me, right? Am I getting you properly?
I think I'm confused about this
idea
myself.
of literature के अंदर में ये दो आ सकते हैं क्या cleanly ऐसे पूछेंगे, right? So first, this established idea of literature also is a political and historical one. There is no ultimate what should I say, pure notion of literature like Plato's idea, right? You started discussing Plato, right? So Plato said कि तुम्हारे सामने जो screen है ना वो real screen नहीं है. It exists, but it is not real. Why? Because the real screen is the one in your mind, the idea of screen. Because it's eternal and permanent. आपके सामने की screen है तो फूट जाएगी. आपका phone 6 महीने में आप बदलते हो, 6 हफ्ते में बदलते हो, 6 दिन में बदलते हो. So it's not it's not real screen. Right. So this Platonic understanding of literature is a problem, that there is some pure idea of literature, high literature, to which these two cultural forms have to be established or subsumed under. So that's a problem. So I will reverse your question. You can always question the pure idea of literature, right?
Okay.
That is a question. You can contest that. That's the first thing. The second thing, I will get back to you, Harsh, till I discuss this point with Stuti as Ray. The second thing that you are conflating is the oral traditions of past with modern practice of spoken word poetry. The oral traditions were communal traditions, by which I mean they belong to a group, right? It is a group that owns those texts. For example, I worked on Narsi Mehta, one of very great Gujarati poet, right? His texts belong to people, right? And people bond with each other when they perform, sing Narsi Mehta, who is part of the memory. Right? And that is the form of cultural ethos which binds people together. So repeated performance is one way of perpetuating bonds within society. It's a practice which bonds society together. And it is illiterate or semi-literate tradition. Right? Illiterate कहते हो तो उसके ऊपर आप derogatory stigma करते हो ना, ये अनपढ़ आदमी है. राइट कबीर अनपढ़ आदमी था मगर हम बहुत टाइम स्पेंड करने वाले हैं कबीर के ऊपर, राइट? कबीर को लिखना भी नहीं आता. So these oral traditions have sectarian value, religious value, which bind sects and societies together. The modern spoken word tradition is an individualistic tradition. मेरा परसों ब्रेकअप हो गया और मैं ड्रग्स लेती हूँ और मेरी माँ बहुत बुरी है, राइट? ये रेंटिंग जो है वो इंडिविजुअल सफरिंग होता है, या यू रेंट एट पॉलिटिकल एस्टैब्लिशमेंट व्हाटएवर. सो दैट इज नॉट इक्विवेलेंट टू ओरल ट्रेडिशंस ऑफ सॉन्ग एंड परफॉर्मेंस सिंगिंग ट्रेडिशन जो इंडिया में है. Communal traditions hai. By communal, I don't mean Hindu versus Muslim. By communal, I mean community traditions hai, right? Which communities used to have some sort of shared ethos. Is very different from आप जब कोई open mic पे जाते हो और आप कहते हो कि gender कितना restrictive है या depression. Now that is very individualistic. वो खुद की it's बड़ास निकालना tradition very often, and it is hardly going to remain in somebody else's memory. Even the performer himself or herself is going to forget it, right? So it does not become part of community memory. स्तुति,
Right.
it does not become, सिर्फ आप रिकॉर्डिंग रख सकते हो और आप जब चाहे वो सुन सकते हो, मगर कोई उसे याद करके अपने बेटे को नहीं सिखाएगा तुम्हारी रैंटिंग. Do I get what I'm saying?
Yes, yes.
So you
But
have
then
to
sir,
distinguish
वो जो हमने, हाँ.
go ahead. Yeah.
So what we discussed in first semester, कि it has to be written down to be considered literature. What about that? What we established
That is the Western model of literature.
Okay. But we can't say the same for Indian tradition,
The
culture.
terms, there are 3 terms actually used. One, as I said, is kavya. Second is sahitya, and the third is vangmay. By vangmay, you mean anything that is made of words. Vak. Vak does not exactly mean words. Vak is considered to be Vani, which is goddess of speech, who has graced you, right? Saraswati, जो आपको grace देती है, तो उसे वाक कहते हैं, right? So it's a divine power, that God-given power होती है वाणी की. So anything made out of word Vani is Vangmay, right? And it includes religious, spiritual Vangmay. It includes everything that is verbal. Vangmay yani words.
This is what would consist. This is what Indian literature would consist of, as opposed to the Western idea.
Yeah, these were the categories used on Indian subcontinent to discuss what is considered as literature. Now, literature is a category used in Western history, cultural history. And what I'm pointing out, that we cannot really consider them simply equivalent. Right? Though we consider Indian literature, और actually literature का idea जो हमारे subcontinent पे था, और जो literature से we imply, right, is very different. You have to be aware of this lack of equivalence. Vangmay would include everything that is spoken, sung, danced to. Even an illiterate person produces Vangmay, like Kabir does, right? Can produce Vangmay because he does not know how to write, right? Or even a Pandit can produce Shastra, or a Rishi can produce Mantra or Itihas, whatever. So it's a huge discursive space that does not consider writing as very important. That is what Vangmay is, right? Sahitya and Kavya are literary. Primarily, they are meant for literature and aesthetics. Aesthetic purpose, artistic, aesthetic purpose, उसके पर बहुत important purpose है of Kavya and Sahitya, right? So this is the point that I am making is, just like India or nation cannot be thought of as a universal category, even the idea of literature cannot be thought of as a universal category. You have to understand within the context of cultural history on the subcontinent, what is the meaning of Vangmay, Sahitya and Kavya. So literature as belonging to a European intellectual and cultural history, Vangmay, Kavya and Sahitya belong to the cultural history on the subcontinent, right? So that's the distinction that I'm trying to make.
Got it. I have one more question related to genres, but Harsh was going to say something. I'll ask after.
Okay, Harsh, let's have Harsh's question first.
Yeah, because this will divert the discussion somewhere else. Yeah.
Okay. Kहाँ गया Harsh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I think I might have partially got the answer to my question from what you and Stuti were discussing, but still, I'm not sure. So can we use the argument when you said the first appearance of writing in the Indian subcontinent emerged and the evidence of writing is found during the period of Ashoka, 2 centuries before Christ was born. So then, can we use this argument to prove that the Vedas are nothing but mythology, Ramayana and Mahabharata are, because Vedas must be composed much earlier than that. If the first writings have appeared just 2 centuries before the birth of Christ, then
So
Vedas
almost
are
1000 years after they were composed, almost 700-800 साल बाद. So now the question is ये mythology, ये बहुत अच्छा question, my favorite one. Actually, what is mythology? Mythology is also a European category. In India, we did not have mythology as a category. Myth, word myth is used in a very broad sense by Aristotle to imply story, mythos or fable, जिसके पर से plot बनता है, and by which he indicated that it is not an original invention. आप वो कहानी कहीं से ले रहे. So the Greeks who wrote plays did not invent a story like Chetan Bhagat does. They were less creative than Chetan Bhagat or even Kalidas. Did not invent his stories. Right? These stories are stories which everybody knows. So that's the story which everybody knows. उसको mythos कहता है Aristotle. Mythos, right? And plays were based on that. If you come to India, it does not mean, and the term myth underwent a change with the rise of modernity in the West, right? Myth became a story which does not have rational meaning or does not make any rational logical sense. That's how they started looking at myth. And slowly it has something to do with displacement of religion from the middle class life in the West. Religion जैसे बाहर जाता है. So Thor or Loki ये myth हो सकता है. But Hanuman is not a myth. Hanuman is, you believe in it. It's a religion. It's theology. Right, so you cannot transfer myth, mythology. So when people talk of Indian mythology, I remain slightly confused. Instead of that, the categories used in India were Itihasa Purana tradition. इतिहास पुराण या उसे स्मृति भी कहते थे. स्मृति यानी जो सबको याद है वो. इतिहास मीन्स ऐसे हुआ था. So Itihas and Purana traditions do not belong to Vedic Pura or Vedic corpus, right? They are different discursive domains, and they are open-ended. यानी आज भी आप पुराण लिख सकते हैं. Right? लोगों ने अल्लोपनिषद और अल्लाह ख्रिस्त पुराण लिखा है लोगों ने. Right? So it's an open tradition which is open to people. But the Vedic corpus is limited to people of the first 3 varnas who are called Dvijas, or they have those who are twice born, यानी जिसकी जनेऊ हो सकती है, right? तो पहले 3 वर्णों के लिए वैदिक कॉर्पस एक्सेसिबल था, और ये 3 वर्ण ज्यादा से ज्यादा 20% पॉपुलेशन होगा. राइट, सो बाकी के लिए इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन है. रामायण, महाभारत, जो महाकाव्य है, और पुराण, ऑल सॉर्ट्स ऑफ पुराण, भागवत पुराण है, विष्णु पुराण, शिव पुराण. So these are 2 discursive domain. One is a kind of closed discursive domain called the Vedic Purvara, which is limited to the upper caste, upper varna, while the open tradition is accessible to everyone, right? So when you say Indian mythology, then you are talking of Itihas Puran traditions, right? So you cannot say that Vedas are myths, because one, myth is a Western notion. Second, Rigved belongs to a different discursive domain, which is accessible only to 20 to 30% of the society. While the Itihas Puran or so Vedic tradition के लिए word है Shruti, सुनना, because Veds are considered to be apaurushaya, not composed by any human beings, right? They were heard by the Rishis and they wrote and they composed. So it's a Shruti tradition. While Itihas Puran tradition क्या है? Smruti tradition. Right? So these are two different intellectual domains of discourse in India, two different discourses. So you cannot say Rigved is mythology. You can say that only if you are using a Western term of myth, right? It is considered knowledge. So the point that the entire class I'm trying to make is that we have to be very careful while we make this transference, right, of ideas from here to there. Idea of nation, तो इंडिया में वैसा नेशन ही नहीं है जैसे यूरोप में नेशन, राइट? देन आइडिया ऑफ लिटरेचर, तो इंडिया में ऐसा आइडिया था ही नहीं लिटरेचर का. देन सेम अप्लाइज टू माइथोलॉजी. Get what I'm saying? You have to situate it historically in the cultural history. No, Valmiki Ramayana does not fall under Shruti. Shruti में क्या आता है? 3 संहिता, 4 संहिता, ऋग्वेद, अथर्ववेद, सामवेद, यजुर्वेद. बाद में आरण्यक आते हैं. आरण्यक क्या होते हैं? आरण्यक्स आर फॉरेस्ट में कंपोज किए गए एक्सप्लेनेशंस एंड स्पेकुलेशन, फिलोसॉफिकल स्पेकुलेशंस है. एंड तीसरे आते हैं ब्राह्मण. So Brahman Granth. So these are again philosophical speculations on larger philosophical concepts like self, Atma, or Brahma, and all that. And finally, something called the Upanishads. So श्रुति में सिर्फ ये 4 चीजें आती है. कौन सी? संहिता, आरण्यक, ब्राह्मण और उपनिषद. बस ये सिर्फ 4 चीजें आती है. स्मृति में इतिहास पुराण आता है. जैसे रामायण इज महाकाव्य, इतिहास और पुराण में आता है. इतिहास ऐसे हुआ था, राइट? दिस इज व्हाट इट वाज. सो ये कौन है पूछने वाला? नाम क्या है आपका? आई डोंट नो.
मैत्रेयी.
अच्छा, so I couldn't get the name. Monolia. Okay, Maitreyi. Okay, so Valmiki Ramayana.
I asked sir because मतलब जहाँ तक मुझे पता है, I've heard कि वाल्मीकि had predicted कि ऐसा ऐसा होने वाला है before Lord Ram was born. तो इसीलिए I was wondering कि does it fall under Shruti? Because
it falls under Smruti. Shruti में there would be no originators of mantras and suktas. ऋग्वेद में जो 100 something 1068 mantra है, are not created by any rishi. In fact, they have heard it. They are, because somebody on some apurusheya has composed it. Does not have a human composer. So all the rishis organize their Vedic text in this manner, right? So Valmiki Ramayana is composed by believed to be composed by Valmiki, right? And Mahabharata is believed to be composed by Ved Vyas. So it has a human composer, author. Hope I am making point clear. Ved does not have any human, right? And that again brings us to the genre का question जो आने वाला था, वो आएगा ही. epics are not equivalent to Mahakavyas, right? Mahakavya belongs to Shruti tradition and considered, what should I say, religious spiritual texts. Iliad, Odyssey are considered epics, but nobody worships the gods in Iliad or Odyssey या Aeneid पे जो आने वाले gods हैं, उनकी पूजा कोई नहीं करता. क्यों नहीं करता? ग्रीक में भी नहीं करते होंगे, थोड़े बहुत करते होंगे तो पता नहीं. हेलो, येता फ्रीच आहे 15-20 मिनिटानंतर. आता क्लास चालू आहे. काय काय हरकत नाही, मग मी कॉल करतो हवं असेल तर. Yeah, so epics hai, the classical epics are no longer, nobody worships Zeus or all those people, right? I hope you get what I'm saying. The Greek pantheon, yes, nobody worships them, but Mahakavya is something that is worshipped by people here, and thousands and lakhs of people believe it to be true. So Hanuman is not a character from an epic. I hope you get that. So epics ko Mahakavya hum the whole class that we are discussing for today is making only one point, that we have to be very careful in conflating two categories which belong to different frames, historical frames, right? Nation, then India, literature to India categories. You have to be, so when we set up these equivalences, we have to be very aware of historical differences within them. Otherwise, you are liable to confuse. That's the whole point. Yeah, Divya.
Sir, I don't know if it's related, but I was just confused. Then how would we categorize like the Bible or the Quran?
How do we? They are revelations in their own traditions. They are the Bible. Quran is dictated by the God to the Prophet Muhammad, right? So it's revelation by God, and the Prophet wrote it down. So it begins by God telling him, write down, right? So it's a different tradition. Bible belongs to a different tradition. So you have to historically understand these texts in their contexts, right? So Quran has to be situated within the Islamic categories and histories, cultural histories and cultural frames. And Bible has to be understood, situated within histories of Christianity and intellectual, ideological frames of Christianity, right? So you cannot say that Vedas are like Quran or Vedas are like Bible, right? Because they are very different historical frames.
Yes, sir, that makes sense.
Not only that, if you don't believe in Quran, you are not a Muslim, right? And if you don't believe in Bible, then you are not a Christian. But there is no such central text which defines Indian Hindus. I'm sorry, right? So that's a very different tradition. Definition of a religion which is based on text and prophet is very different on the subcontinent. You have to keep that in mind. There is no single text that is at the center. There are texts which are highly valued, like Bhagavad Gita, right? Which is part of Itihas Purana, Mahabharata, right? It's taken from that. and that is a kind of summarizes many of Vedic Upanishadic ideas, and that is accessible to everybody. Everybody can read Gita, but not everybody can read Rig Veda according to Indian subcontinental traditions. Why? Because you have to belong to the first three varnas. Only then आपकी जनोई होती है, तो बाद में ही आप सीखने जाते हो गुरु के पास. उपनिषद यानी गुरु के पास बैठना, आचार्य के पास बैठना. So it's a very different systems. You have to understand these systemic differences. Yes, go ahead, Maitri.
Sir, I wanted to ask ki, you said that epic and Mahakavya is not the same thing, and yet we don't have another English word for Mahakavya when to refer to it. So
Exactly. So that is the problem of translation. जो हमारा जो आखिरी टर्म है ना, वो तो अभी से आ गया अंदर. ट्रांसलेशन में आप इक्विवेलेंस बनाते हो जहां पे इक्विवेलेंस होता ही नहीं है, राइट? So
yes, sir.
incommensurable categories are very often put together as if they are equivalents. We have to be very careful while doing that. We have to situate these categories in their histories for our own understanding. Otherwise, we'll end up confusing. Because somebody very interestingly asked whether Vedic, and people talk about Vedas as if they are revelations. Revelation is a very different phenomena, right? It's when the prophets, whether it's Abraham or whether it's Jesus or whether it is Prophet Muhammad, God revealed to them, right? And they took that message. They were the messengers who took that to people. Apurushe means Rishis have heard it. Something that is not composed by humans. It's a divine composition heard by the Rishis. And these Rishis are also almost divinities in their own way. So revelation और इसमें भी फर्क है. दोनों God's words हैं मगर अलग है ना? In fact, what we mean by God in Christianity or Islam is not the same as what we mean by God on the subcontinent, because God is also an idea, and it varies from civilizations to civilizations, cultures to cultures. There is no universal definition of God.
For this, we have this term lost in translation. So
I won't say lost in translation, but you have to be careful of the historical contexts, cultural histories. Lost means you don't have any other option, right, to understand it.
Right.
Right. So we'll discuss translation also, don't worry. So now, if you, and it's about time that we stop. So what we did today was we continued our conversation, right? We are trying to understand. I made a distinction between a field and syllabus, may a list of books, right? So our paper is not a list of books, but a field of questions, right? And we have already opened up questions. So we started unpacking, opening up the field, right? And the problems and the problematics involved in that field. So when you open up that field, and within this opened up field, we will study these texts, right? So tomorrow we'll talk of English and English translation. We'll look at the whole question because this paper is unique. Indian literature in English translation. जापान में कोई जापानीज लिटरेचर इन इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन नहीं पढ़ता. जर्मन लिटरेचर इन इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन जर्मन लोग नहीं पढ़ते. चाइना में चाइनीज लिटरेचर इन इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन कोई नहीं पढ़ता. मगर इंडिया में इंडियन लिटरेचर इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन में पढ़ते हैं. क्यों?
तो कॉलोनियलिज्म का बहुत बड़ा रोल हो सकता है.
Yes. Any other insights? Divya.
Yes, sir. I was thinking that maybe uh, Indian writing translated to English.
Can you
Am I
come again?
audible?
हाँ हाँ
सर जोर से
yeah
बोलूं. हाँ. So I was thinking that maybe because Indian writing translated to English is like a whole field of, that's what we discussed, right? Whole field of literature in itself. It's unique.
yes and nobody else does it. That's what I asked. जापानीज लोग जापानीज लिटरेचर इन ट्रांसलेशन नहीं पढ़ते. गुजराती लिटरेचर इन इंग्लिश ट्रांसलेशन पढ़ने वाले गुजराती लोग बहुत कम है. ब्रिटिश लिटरेचर इन हिंदी ट्रांसलेशन कौन पढ़ेगा? कोई ब्रिटिश पढ़ेगा? शेक्सपियर का हिंदी अनुवाद. पर हम पढ़ते हैं, हमारा ही साहित्य हम ट्रांसलेशन में पढ़ते हैं अंग्रेजी. क्यों? वन रीजन इज colonial history. Any other suggestions?
Sir, it might be also because India is a linguistically vast country. So there are many Indian writings, language बहुत सारे.
Because there is no one language which can
Yes.
represent India. Indian literature has to be represented in translation. It may be English or Hindi or whatever, or Gujarati or Marathi. Translation is the dope. Translation के बगैर Indian literature हो ही नहीं सकता, पढ़ ही नहीं सकते. How does that sound? So Indian literature is constituted by the act of translation. No translation, no Indian literature. Which is not true for, say, for example, Japanese literature or Chinese literature or French literature or English literature or American literature. How does that sound? Indian literature is possible only and only through translation, because largely because India has thousands of languages. It's linguistically diverse. And you have a paper called Gujarati Literature in English Translation, right? So
Yes, sir.
right. So that is, you are the first ever batch in the history of universities in India to study this paper. Historical batch. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Bhavya. Bhavya, you have a question?
It's more of an observation, and that is, it's just a small episode from. Yes, sir.
It's 1 o'clock and it's time to stop. That's why I will just take your observations.
Okay, so it's just that Sanskrit, Prakrit, and other scripts in which Kabir probably wrote, I do not really know, but these are not actually understood regularly by us people normally. And some
Can you come again? The last sentence. I didn't catch. Bhavya, I didn't catch your sentences. Kabir का क्या बाद में? Reading translation.
So my basic gist is that it is difficult to understand Kabir in the original language for students who are not even great with Hindi itself.
Right.
First semester it was very difficult for me, and it is something that not everyone is good with. So proficiency isn't there. This is where translation is also important, because of the ancient texts are hard to discern as far as the construction of languages is gone by and the impacts of colonialism.
Right, that is the topic for today. Why is it that Gujaratis don't read Gujarati literature in Gujarati? Or why is it that Marathi people don't read Marathi literature in Marathi? Or Tamilians read Tamil literature in Tamil? Why don't they do that? Instead, they want to read Shakespeare, you want to read Milton, you want to read Shelley, and you want to say how great this literature is. But the societies which produced Shelley, Keats, or Shakespeare do not study Hindi, Gujarati, or Tamil. There is no mad rush for studying Tamil literature in Britain or Bangla literature in Britain. right? And if I open up admission process, you will find that English पढ़ने के लिए 300 400 260 पे हमको बंद करना पड़ता है, right? So there is a rush, there is a great demand for English literature, language. Literature नहीं, language. मगर literature आपके माथे मारा जाता है, right? So we'll talk about this predicament and the consequences of this tomorrow when we look at the question of English, right? So that's the topic for today, where we'll open up the question of English, very importantly. And by that, you also have the syllabus with you. So you start gathering the material, right? Text, start obtaining the text. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
Ujala, you had to say something.
No, sir. No.
Well,
Yeah.
Ujala is assistant professor and she is doing PhD on Hindi, English, Gujarati
Mhm.
literatures, which from angle of world literature.
Yeah. We'll
Okay.
talk about this some other time in some
Some
other
other
lecture.
time I'm winding up the class for today.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so all of you take
Okay.
care and see you tomorrow at 11:30. And please give me an update about your syllabus and the texts tomorrow. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.